Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Simone. It's just a quick review for those of you who have an essay on the progressive era where you have to pick two reformers. So for your introduction, please make sure you identify that the progressive era was a time during the early 1900s when reformers were trying to make positive changes in society, and they largely supported more government involvement to do so. So it's very important if you could even begin with a brief sentence that the late 1800s, which was referred to as the Gilded Age, was a time where people supported laissez-faire, which is hands-off government philosophy. So that would be a good way for you to just open it, and then you could identify the two individuals who were very progressive-minded, who were trying to reform society. So just a quick overview again. Late 1800s is the Gilded Age. That was the time of the rise of big business, and people supported a laissez-faire philosophy. Then in the early 1900s, the progressive era begins, and this was a time where people supported more government involvement to solve the problems that were created during the Gilded Age. So I did three quick slides for you. One is the president who is most often associated with the progressive era, and this is Theodore Roosevelt, whose home is on Long Island in Oyster Bay. And Theodore Roosevelt was a progressive Republican president after William McKinley was assassinated. And when he ran for president, Theodore Roosevelt's slogan, or his domestic plan, was called the Square Deal. And he basically wanted everybody to have an equal opportunity to succeed. In this Square Deal, there were various elements of his presidential agenda. So he was very much a conservationist who was devoted to setting aside land for national parks. Theodore Roosevelt also did like to hunt, and if you ever do go to his house in Oyster Bay, you will see numerous animal skins and animal heads throughout the home. Now, he also supported greater rights for labor, and during the Gilded Age, 1800s, unions really struggled to get recognition. But when Theodore Roosevelt was president, there was a threat of a coal miners' strike, and the coal miners' strike was happening as winter was approaching. So he told the leaders of the union and the owners of the mines that they must settle their strike, and he called them to the White House and demanded that this strike be settled. And the primary reason is because he refused to allow winter to approach, and then the people would not have heat in that region. So the strike was ended, and the workers did get a decent amount of the better conditions that they were looking for, higher wages, and I believe shorter hours. But it's just another example of him being on the side of the people. The progressive movement really is a foundation of the Populist Party. Actually, that's wrong. The progressive movement was derived from the Populist Party, which was very much in favor of more power to the people. Now, a third thing Teddy Roosevelt believed in was consumer rights. And as I'm going to review in a second, when the book The Jungle came out, Theodore Roosevelt was horrified. So at first, he was not a big fan of Upton Sinclair's, but I'll say that in the next slide. But anyway, the Food and Drug Administration was created, as was the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act during this time. And the last thing for Roosevelt that is very important, he was referred to as a trust buster. If you recall, during the Gilded Age, there were men like John D. Rockefeller who had very, very large monopolies. And Teddy Roosevelt believed that there were some of these monopolies, also can be called trusts, that were not good for the people, and he wanted to break them up. So he did distinguish between good trusts, which helped the people, and bad trusts, which did not. If you'd like to just mention that on a foreign policy front, Theodore Roosevelt believed in the big stick policy, you can mention it as an additional feature of his presidency. Now, you might want to begin with Upton Sinclair or Jacob Riis. And these two men were known as muckrakers. And it would be great if you could remember that it was Theodore Roosevelt who gave them this title. Theodore Roosevelt was not a big fan of the muckrakers. It was not a positive term that he was using. But these are people who wrote and exposed about the problems in society. Americans would not have been aware of many of these conditions if it weren't for their work. They really depended on freedom of the press in order to have the opportunity to expose these problems. So the first one, Upton Sinclair, he's a muckraker who wrote over 100 books in his lifetime. One of his most famous is called The Jungle. Now, initially, he just wanted to expose the bad conditions for workers in factories in Chicago, and he went undercover to do so. But when he was there, he really saw just how unsanitary the conditions were for where they were preparing the meat. So there would be rats that would be mixed in with the meat. There would be poisoned bread that would be mixed in, rusty nails. Workers would use the water to clean their hands after the bathroom, and that would go into the meat. So this book was at first it was a series of magazine articles. He put it together in a book 1 year later, and it's usually seen as like the symbol of the progressive era, that this book horrified so many people and brought so much attention to the bad conditions. So as a result of it, Congress passes the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Since you did already learn about the cause of the Civil War, you might want to say that this book, some people refer to it as the Uncle Tom's Cabin of wage slavery. So how Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the problems of slavery, this book exposed the problems of factory life. And one last thing you could add about Upton Sinclair, he was openly a socialist. And for those of you who are following the presidential elections now, Bernie Sanders actually calls himself a democratic socialist. Socialists at the time were people who wanted there to be no class structure in America. They want everybody to be from the same class. And there was a growing segment of the population who did believe in socialism at the time. Now, the last guy, Jacob Riis, wrote the book How the Other Half Lives. Jacob Riis was not born here. He was born in Denmark, one of 15 kids. He came to the United States when he was 21 years old. His first job was working as a reporter covering the police department. He did come to New York City, I should say. He's another muckraker, though, but the difference between he and Upton Sinclair is that he uses a lot of photography in his book. And that helps tremendously for people who obviously were not literate at the time. His book, How the Other Half Lives, focuses on all of the poor living conditions, which were known as tenements, where there were one-room, crowded apartments for many people to be living in. And for those of you who study photography, which I am not one of them, he is the first photographer to use flash photography in his work. Jacob Riis did argue that he felt uplifting the poor people would benefit everyone, that upper-class wealthy people should also be interested in having poorer people uplifted and improve the living conditions for all American citizens. And I don't have a slide for this, but for your conclusion, a great conclusion would be that, it really would be fantastic, that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders today are arguing with each other over who is the more progressive candidate. So you're writing about progressives, and now today, Bernie Sanders, who is seen as being the most progressive candidate, is claiming that Hillary Clinton is not progressive enough. And she's fighting back, saying that her record is very progressive and that Bernie Sanders should stop those attacks. As you know, I could go on about this all day long, but I'm going to make this under 10 minutes. Good luck studying and prepare for those essays, and I will see you in class at some time.